Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop with Sue. And today, first of all, it's so much fun to get back together with people you've interviewed before. It's like we have this online friendship, and it's really nice to be here with Elizabeth Hamblet, who services a population that can be overlooked. So I'm just going to give your bio for a second.
I
Elizabeth
appreciate
Hamblet
it.
is an expert in college disability services and helping neurodivergent high school students successfully transition to college. She offers programs on prepping students for successful college transitions, and her newest book, Seven Steps to College Success, A Pathway for Students with Disabilities, will be out in early 2023. So hopefully we'll be back on talking about the new book.
I would love that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here with us. And I want to start with, who are these kids, and is there a commonly accepted language to categorize them? Like, you hear neurodivergent, differently wired. So how do
Yeah.
how do you talk about them?
You know what? I think that's such an excellent question. I want to start by saying I think I try very hard to use the language that the people I'm speaking to and about prefer. And what's actually challenging in getting this right is that there really isn't a consensus. There are certainly, our Debbie Reber, who's the head of the Tilt parenting community and the author of that book.
And
You
we
know,
should put that in the comments, because if you
oh,
don't know about it, you should be checking it out.
Oh yeah, Debbie's wonderful. So neurodivergent, neurodiverse is the terminology I hear a lot of people using. And again, I am agnostic, if you will, about what is the right terminology. But I sometimes in my presentations I preface things by saying that I use the word disability because when we're talking about accommodations at the college level or anywhere, frankly, we are talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it has to be a disability in order to qualify for protections. And so I don't use the word disability to in any way, denigrate a student and to acknowledge the fact that as people in the community would say, it's not that these people have any deficiencies, it's about our system and the way it works and the way we educate and do things. And so I think that the word disability is really about our system, but we still need that word to get
Legally.
access to to what the students are looking for.
Yeah, so you have to use the legal language in order to access the benefits, which kind of
Yeah.
puts it into a weird place, because you may be feeling like that is so negative. So um, colleges, are they increasing services with students who are neurodiverse?
So I really like to lean on the statistics. And so what's frustrating about that in my field is there's just not as many studies of things we'd like to know about as things we'd like to know about. So I would say anecdotally, I hear individual stories about um, schools starting to recognize that, for instance, more students might need things like help with executive functioning. Now, what's interesting about that is I'm not necessarily hearing stories about that coming through the Disability Services Office, but rather more through like the General Tutoring Center. So I interviewed some folks, I think a year or two ago, about how they provide, the kind of contact that students are looking for when they come to college. So peer mentors, as I said, academic coaching is actually more available through the general services available to all students. And what I like about that is, and you started this conversation, Susan, with asking about language. For students who are reluctant to identify themselves to our offices, to our disability services offices, they're sometimes called the Office for Accessibility. Um, they The services offered for everybody kind of opens the opportunity for them to get the help that they're looking for perhaps without having to identify it to us. I think it also makes it seem more mainstream and not so specialized, which for some students is really going to perhaps be a selling point. Now, the thing to keep in mind is at college, they can hire anybody they want to be an academic coach, an executive functioning coach. Those people are not, there's no such thing as like a master's degree in either of those areas. So if your student is looking for that, it probably doesn't matter much to them, but just know as parents that these may not be people with specialized training like myself. I have a master's in special needs. And even though no college requires that for the job I do, I have a background in working with students with learning disabilities.
I think that's so interesting because I feel like that about life. Like you tick the thing off your box because you're so happy you found a therapist for your kid, and
Yeah.
then it's not a match for your kid, and you kind of feel like, but I did that already. So, and this one's even harder because the kid's not in front of you; they're somewhere
Yeah.
else.
I think that's such an interesting point. I do these small group consults with parents, and one of them said that her kid was really dragging their feet on the college applications, and they already had the list of where he was going to apply. And so she hired a college kid to sit with him and do these. And what I thought was so interesting about that was, I mean, perhaps in developing the list and finding a good match, you would want somebody with some experience. But for the piece of just getting the work done, she thought it was like a really positive kind of peer pressure. That the kid would not want to look like a slacker in front of somebody who was already in college. I thought that was genius.
Yeah, I actually have never heard that before, and I think it's brilliant. And
Really?
also, sometimes if anxiety is getting in the way of accomplishing something, sometimes literally just having a person sit there with you and be encouraging is enough to make it happen. It's like a little kid having someone hold their hand, right? And
Mm-hmm.
but to hire a college kid who already just went through it, brilliant to that mom.
Yes,
Thanks.
I
Yeah.
find parents are incredibly creative about the way they approach things.
Okay, so do we tell in the application process? Like, is there a should it be in your kid's essay? Like, should there be some place where your kid puts out there that I learn differently?
Well, that's a great question. And what families should know is it is illegal for colleges to ask any questions about a disability. So if you have not had a student apply to college yet, what you will discover when yours does is that the common application does not have any place that asks about disabilities. So that means it's the student's choice. And I don't do admissions work, but I know a lot of people who do. And for the next book, I spoke to admissions directors, and I also spoke to some consultants who are specialized in working with students with disabilities. And what I think is a lot of people would find really interesting is the admissions deans were all adamant that the students should identify themselves in some way. Now, it doesn't have to be the focus of their essay, but what they all emphasized is they are looking for a really complete picture of a student, and that disability is part of that. And they really, tried to uh, uh, address these rumors that you should never tell a school that you have a disability, that was, that's an automatic like X against the student. And Rick Clark, who I don't know if you know anything about the Georgia Tech admissions blog, but he's co-author of a book called something like Getting In and Staying Together, something like Family's Guide to Getting In and Staying Together, something like that. Anyway, it's a great book, and it's about trying to take the stress out of the admissions process. And what he said is, he thinks that people imagine all these machinations that go into the decision making in a college admissions committee. And he said it's just not like that. And one of the directors I spoke to said, we're looking for a reason to say yes. We're not looking for reasons to say no. So the consultants that I spoke to who actually work with students on their application kind of talked about emphasizing the positive, and don't wax poetic unless it's something that you are really involved with and really passionate about. A simple statement can do it, just an explanation. But I think what's most important, and I know that your work also talks about all the soft skills that students need to be prepared. We talk about self-determination for young people and making their own decisions about their future. Um, it should be your student's choice whether to disclose or not. I think it's really
That's
important.
so hard for us as parents, right?
Of
Like
course.
we're so enmeshed in their application process and trying
Yeah.
to drive that so much. But it's such a good point, because if it's humiliating, which it shouldn't be, but it might be, then making that the point of your friction is
Yeah.
probably not going to really help so much.
Well, and I think too, listen, I'm sure you hear all sorts of wild things. I get stuff thrown at me all the time. Well, I heard this and I heard this. Some people are telling families that it's to their benefit to do that, and that they should, that there are some kind of quotas set aside that every college has to admit of students with disabilities. That's just simply not true, and that's not a negative. But it is a reason, if your student is reluctant to disclose, not to push them to do so. So yeah, I think as parents, we have to honor our kids' decision about that stuff and let them make that decision, because look, you're never going to know why a student did or didn't get into a college. One of the things I hear from parents sometimes is, well, if my daughter Elizabeth didn't get into Boston University, it was because she told them she had a disability, and then it means it's not a good fit. But it could just be that there are too many people from the town that I come from looking to get into that university. And that year they needed a bassoonist for the marching band. No, we don't have this marching band, but
You could, going down that path will drive you insane. Like you
yes,
really cannot know. There's no way to know. Even when your kid doesn't get a job, or we don't get jobs, or things
right,
don't work out. Like there's just so many variables that we don't know. But the one thing that you started to talk about, which I really want to focus on, is
yeah,
this sending them off ready to advocate for themselves, which
hmm,
you talk about it in terms of this particular population, but it's true for all of our kids. They
hmm,
all need experience. So what should high school look like? And if parents are going to put their energy anywhere, what
hmm.
should they put it on in terms of sending off a kid who can self-advocate?
I think it's about really building their skills and building their independence. And so, starting to scale back your involvement in things and your communications with teachers. I think it's a better path to start, to help your student compose an email if there's a challenge, or to request help. Even stuff like knowing when to go talk to somebody. These are those subtle skills that we don't really think about. Like, don't go and try and talk to the teacher about the grade you got as she's starting class. She's going to be busy. She's going to be eager to get moving on. And so asking, they're so reluctant to ask for anything. And I think COVID has also made that harder, because it used to be, you could walk up someplace, and then I think students got out of the habit of talking to people. Everything was by email. And I think email somehow raises the stakes almost. I think for students, it's like, oh, if I have to put it in writing, it's a big deal. Go to the teacher and say, when is a good time for me to talk to you? And you can help them prepare talking points. There's no law that says you have to go into a conversation without notes if you want to be prepared for it. And I think actually teachers would appreciate it, seeing that a student prepared for a conversation. So, everybody talks about having them make their own doctor's appointments, but seeking help. One of the things that I think is tricky is well-meaning parents have their student, tutored in every subject. And, what's challenging is I think sometimes the goal of getting a student through high school, literally just getting them through high school, doesn't always align well with how you prepare them for the independence of college. And so, if your goal is for them to get the best possible grades, you would presumably provide every support in the world, lots of tutoring, somebody to keep them on track, depending on how much need they have. But at the college level, a lot of that stuff's not going to be available, and the demands of the work increase. And so I think, scaling back some of the support so a student can have a realistic sense of, if somebody doesn't show up to the house every afternoon, or my parents don't sit down with me every afternoon and go through my assignment notebook with me and help me check the course management system if I didn't write it down and do all this stuff, what does their performance look like? Because very likely that's what's going to look like at college. And so
It's
you need
such a rough balance, though, because on the one hand, we do really have to maybe bolster some kids differently than other kids, right? Like if executive function is really a struggle, they may need extra help. But how do we set it up so that they're not getting help for life? They're getting help to wean off it.
Well, you want to talk to whoever's providing that help about whether they are teaching them strategies. And, there's the expression that teachers use sometimes to describe proper instruction as, I do, we do, you do. So you start by showing them the strategy and you model it, and then you help them do it together. And then it should be that they work on the mastery themselves. So, if they start by having a routine every day where they sit down, they empty the backpack and, take out the assignment notebook, whatever it is, then eventually that student should be able to perform that task without somebody walking them through the steps. So maybe it requires a checklist, but they have to get used to using the checklist. So I agree with you that it's going to look different for different students, but I think you want to be wary of sending a student off to college feeling like they can do certain things, but only with supports. Because one of the things I worry so much about is their sense of security about where they are. You don't want them going feeling anxious because they've never had to do it without anybody, and now they're going to.
It's a little bit like teaching your kid to ride a bike. Like eventually you're letting go. And we're, when you have tutors coming to the house or your kid needs extra support, if you don't think of it that way, if you think of it, as you said, about getting through high school, they may continue all the way to the last day of high school showing up at your house, but really you want to release them at some point.
I mean, that's my philosophy. I believe well-meaning parents do what they think is best for their students. And look, I guess there are folks out there who can hire a tutor to work virtually with their kid every day. But, literally, even an executive functioning coach or a specialized tutor just can't be with them at college every moment. And so at some point, they're going to log off the Zoom, and your student's going to have to sit down and write the paper. And you want them to know that they can do it without having to have somebody there. The support to get started, I think, is really important, and the check-ins maybe, but nobody can make your kid do the work.
So your kid has had accommodations along the way because they have an IEP or a 504 or whatever they have. And is there a parallel to that in college?
That's a great question. So I I always have to, I end up talking in circles. I always have to say there are no 504 plans or IEPs in college. And then I have to note, because somebody will put a comment up and say, oh, my kid goes to Hamblet University and she has a 504 plan. What she probably has is a letter of accommodation or a notification of accommodations that her school calls a 504 plan. But a plan is a very specific thing, right? So that's why I get a little picky about language, because to me, a plan says to somebody, we're going to set out goals and objectives and steps to get there. That's not what we do at college, but we do accommodations. So for those who have heard otherwise, high school IEPs and even 504 plans are no longer valid once your student graduates from high school. IDEA, which is what IEPs are written under, doesn't apply to colleges. And Section 504 has different subparts, and K through 12 is under subpart D, and colleges are under subpart E. And there's no mandate for plans. There's no mandate for us to carry over what's in a 504. So with all that kind of scary stuff out of the way, colleges do provide a variety of accommodations for a variety of disabilities. So, my area is students with learning disabilities and ADHD, students with autism, students with food allergies will get accommodated in the dining spaces. Students with physical disabilities will have specialized lab equipment if they're studying in a class that requires a lab. Students with psychological disabilities may get accommodations for times that they are struggling greatly um, with an episode of their disability. So there are lots of different kinds of accommodations available. Every once in a while, I'll see a comment saying, oh, accommodations at colleges are only for students with physical disabilities. And that's just not true.
Okay, so let's talk about the fact that there are schools that are going to have places for your kids to go, and you send them off feeling so like confident and at peace that there's all this opportunity, but then your kid doesn't actually access any of it.
Not uncommon, not uncommon. Yeah, so again, I think part of what we can do, you asked about the preparation in high school, is, to have students engaged. Some students want to be very involved in their IEP meeting. There really aren't 504 meetings. But trying to make sure that as they go through high school, somebody sits down with them once a year, the case manager, and talks about what accommodations that we are providing you are you actually using, and are they helpful to you? Because why would a student register for accommodations if they don't think they've been helpful? And also explaining why the team has suggested those for the student. Maybe they have no idea why somebody thinks extended test time would be useful to them. And I think, letting them know that because the research points to this, when they talk to students who didn't register until later, obviously the way we usually identify students for all these research studies is at some point they register with the Disability Services Office. In one study that I read, it was generally after they'd had some academic problems, or professors told them they should, or a coach said, if you need to stay eligible to play, you need to go pursue this stuff. So letting them know that accommodations are intended to level the playing field. They're not there to provide them with an advantage, because some of them feel self-conscious and think that that's why we do this stuff. That accommodations will be, assigned according to their area of need, that this is not something that we do just because we like them and think they should have it. And it's their civil right if they're a student with a disability. Section 504 and the ADA are civil rights laws. And so that for those who want to go on to graduate school or feel like they're going to need records to get a job, they should know that that will not be recorded in their transcript. And that, the only way the next place they go will know that they have a disability and had accommodations is if they tell them.
Okay, so can you give us a little teaser about 7 Steps to College Success, a pathway for students with disabilities?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, I'm really excited. This is my 3rd edition, and I basically rewrite the book every time. And so one of the fun things about doing the revision is the updates. So updated interviews with admissions directors, again, talking more about how they approach things, what they said about when things that are in the transcript or not in the transcript that you might be interested in knowing. Updated interviews with disability services directors about what accommodations are or aren't commonly approved. Updates on documentation requirements. I mean, there's just all sorts of fun things, more dives into the research about how students get prepared, what their experiences are when they get there. Things about, a little bit about parenting. It's not my area of expertise, but I lean on the experts for that stuff. I really tried to provide a logical, progression of information, starting with the changes in the law that you need to know about and why things are different and how that actually looks, what kinds of skills they need, both those soft skills of self-determination and self-advocacy and the academic skills. One thing I want to just circle back to, if we have a moment, when we talked about preparation, if you have a student who is doing different assignments than their classmates, that is something that's going to be very hard to get at college. And so that is part of the preparation, might be over the course of the 4 years in high school, helping them develop the skills to be ready to do the same work as their classmates when they get to college.
Okay, this question, I'd be so remiss not to ask it, but how has COVID changed the landscape?
It's an interesting question. I think, I don't know if the book's quite written yet, so to speak. I think we have, it's made us think about the way we do things at the college level, what's really necessary. But, you know, in my professional community, so I am not a lawyer or a doctor, and this is neither legal nor medical advice. But what I see the conversation in my community saying is that if we are a brick and mortar college, like many of them are, it doesn't, my colleagues don't interpret, you know, what happened during COVID as now being a mandate to turn everything into hybrid classes where students don't have to come. So we have to consider a student's request. But I don't know that I see everything turning into those kinds of arrangements. And, you know, I think we have a lot more students who are struggling with mental health, understandably. So I'm seeing articles in the general press about colleges adding more counseling, which I think is always good because, you know, even without COVID, I think our students need it.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I guess we'll know retrospectively at some point how this played out. It's too early,
Yeah,
right?
I think so, probably. We're still in it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I heard someone say the other day, it's over. We're done.
Oh gosh, no, I mean, not as far as I know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think it's given us some food for thought, but I think in some ways there's still a return to, you know, pre-COVID norms of coming to class. And, you know, I think more supports are available online, which I think is probably good. You know, I think there's more thinking about making those tutoring sessions perhaps available by, but I don't, like I said, I haven't seen any studies showing this yet. It's too early, and we're not very good at checking up on that stuff at the post-secondary level.
Well, Elizabeth Hamblet, as always, such a treat to get to talk to you. And I can't wait to get back together when your book comes out. So
Thank you. I can't wait to get together and talk about it with you. And if anybody has any questions, they can follow me here on Facebook or YouTube or wherever. I show up in a lot of places, but I have lots of free information to share with everybody.
excellent. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Susan.